In January 2020, John W. Raymond was sworn in as the leader of the newly created US Space Force.
Now we have a command with a singular focus on space superiority.
It is the military's first new uniformed service in 72 years.
So everybody, this is Bill and his team from Time magazine.
Over the last 2 years, the Space Force has become tied up with President Trump's political prospects.
Space Force.
A main challenge confronted by the Pentagon is convincing the American public that the Space Force is not an unnecessary vanity project for the president, but rather an idea that has been under consideration for decades. Buckley Air Force Base in Colorado supports air and space operations around the globe. Since its inception in 1947, the US Air Force has created subdivisions to oversee space defense needs. Space Force will be the latest step in this evolution.
Zach Crew Chief, what's your status? Sir.
Many of these service members are likely to form the core of this new branch.
Loading in Threat Zone Romeo. Intel check sources.
There's pretty much nothing that we do as citizens of this world that isn't tied to space.
The United States has spent the past half-century placing satellites into space that now provide the backbone for our daily lives.
First television broadcast via satellite.
The US Air Force operates the Global Positioning System, GPS. Our hospitals, banks, streetlights, and gas pumps all rely on satellite timings to operate.
Still got 145-mile-an-hour winds.
As do American naval ships, missile warning systems, armed drones, and smart bombs.
I don't think the American public sufficiently understands the importance of space. More people probably listen to Stephen Colbert every night. A lot are wondering, when are we going to have, spacecraft transiting here and there, almost a Star Trek version.
Space Force.
The comedians are having a field day with this. It becomes a laughingstock program, and yet this is deadly serious business.
When I came into the space business, I was trained to operate in a peaceful, benign environment. There was no threat, and that requires a different skill set. It requires developing space operators that have a better understanding of joint warfighting, but it also requires us to develop joint warfighters that have a better understanding of space. There's a treaty, people always refer to it, the Outer Space Treaty back in the 60s, and really what that treaty says is you can't have a nuclear weapon in space. Short of that, it's the Wild, Wild West.
Bob Hall is a former satellite operator and the technical director of a private company monitoring satellite behaviors.
For a long time, people have viewed this as a space is big outlook on things, meaning the volume of space is so large and the density of objects so small that the chances of hitting something are too small to worry about. That's changing dramatically over the last decade.
Since the launch of the first satellite into space in 1957, almost 9,000 satellites from 40 different countries have been launched into orbit.
Today, we have roughly 2,500, 2,600 active satellites flying around the Earth. On the drawing boards are something like 57,000.
Resiliency has become increasingly the name of the game to make sure that our satellites are resilient against cyber attacks, the possibility of jamming, so that we have better detection should there be a weapon that would be coming toward a satellite so that we can maneuver out of the way.
We're seeing a lot more activity by foreign countries as they advance the state of the art and they develop new technologies.
The UN now recognizes 90 spacefaring nations. Governments across the globe, primarily led by the US, Russia, and China, are developing technologies that could enable them to interfere with and destroy satellites in a crisis. In November 2019, US intelligence analysts noticed something peculiar after Russia launched a spacecraft into orbit. Bafflingly, it released a second satellite. By mid-January 2020, the Russian satellites had sidled next to a multi-billion-dollar US spy satellite known as the KH-11, one of the US military's most powerful spy tools. Although the Russian satellites pulled away after the US expressed concerns to Russia through diplomatic channels, Time has learned of an alarming development. In a conversation with Time, General Raymond confirmed that on July 15th, the berthed Russian satellite, Cosmos 2543, fired a projectile into outer space. It is the first time the US has accused another nation of a space-based anti-satellite weapons test. Currently, about 16,000 Air Force personnel work under Space Command. Many, if not all, will ultimately become the first members of the Space Force. The Space Force budget for 2021 is $15.4 billion, with a projected increase of $2.6 billion over the next 5 years.
When I was Secretary of the Air Force, space was a critically important domain for us and for the Joint Force. Is the reorganization the best solution? I concluded the answer to that was no, because inherent in all reorganization is bureaucratic thrashing. To me, this is just an extra thing out there that's going to take away time and attention and money.
Expectation will be it'll take some time. It won't be on like one day they all transfer over. We'll do this in tranches, but I would expect by the fall we'll have a good handle on who will come over, and that we'll be well on our way of making that transfer.
Building out a new military service is a huge task. President Trump has expressed a keen interest to be involved in decisions about uniforms and logos. But aside from the pomp and pageantry, politicization, and bureaucracy, monitoring space and defending satellites is more vital than ever.